The man tells him no. That's the part people forget. Before any of it, before the store, the son, the marriage, the whole slow demolition, Davy Scatinos asks to be led into a card game, and the man running it tells him no, not cryptically, not with a wink. He tells him he doesn't want him in there, that it isn't for him, that he won't like what happens. And Davy begs. He works at it. He keeps asking until he gets a yes. I want to talk about that scene, because it contains the single most misunderstood fact about how people lose everything. Information was never the missing ingredient. He was told. He was told by the person with the most to gain from not telling him. And it made no difference at all, because the thing that puts a man in that chair is not a gap in his knowledge. So let's take the whole collapse apart, in order, because The Sopranos films it more accurately than any documentary I've seen. First, who he is. Davy Scatino is not a degenerate in any way you'd notice at a barbecue. He owns a sporting goods store, a real business built over years, the kind of place that sponsors little league teams. He's married. He has a son who is a decent kid with a real future, college on the horizon, a place he's aiming for, the whole thing more or less arranged. He is a completely ordinary suburban businessman, and he happens to have known Tony Soprano since high school. That last detail is the load-bearing one, and I'll come back to it. Now the game itself, and how it's designed. The executive game is not a scary room. That's the point. It is comfortable, it is glamorous, the food is good, and there are people at that table you'd be pleased to tell your friends you played cards with. There's warmth in there. There's laughter. Davy is greeted like a man who has arrived somewhere. Nobody in gambling ruin is ever menaced into the chair. The chair is pulled out for you, and this is where the show is smarter than the popular image of the subject. When people picture losing everything to gambling, they picture threat, the shadowed room, the heavies, the moment where it turns nasty. But threat is a terrible business model. Threat makes people leave. What actually works, in the back room in New Jersey and in every legal casino on earth, is hospitality, the free drinks, the host who remembers your name, the comped room, the loyalty tier, the little courtesies extended to a valued guest. The entire industry's core competence is making the losing feel like belonging. Davy doesn't just want the money. He wants to be a man who sits at that table, and the table is happy to let him feel that way for as long as he can pay for the privilege. Then he loses. And we get to the mechanism that actually traps him, which is not the debt. It's the friendship. If Davy owed $45,000 to a bank, he would owe it to an institution. Institutions have procedures. There are forms. There is, in the last resort, bankruptcy, an unpleasant, humiliating, but genuinely available exit that exists precisely because society's decided people shouldn't be destroyed forever by one bad year. Davy doesn't owe an institution. He owes a guy he went to high school with, and that debt lives inside a relationship, which means every single collection is conducted warmly. Come here. Sit down. How's Christine? How's the kid? There's no procedure to invoke, no ombudsman, no clock that runs out. He can't stop answering the phone, because you don't do that to a friend. He can't get angry, because getting angry would be disproportionate to the tone of the conversation, and the tone of the conversation is always friendly. That's the trap. Not violence, etiquette. He is being dismantled by men who are being nice to him, and the niceness makes resistance feel like bad manners. Then comes the bust out. And I want to be precise about what actually happens, because it's the best illustration of small business death I know of. They don't seize the store. They use it. The store has something worth far more than its inventory. 30 years of good credit with suppliers. Davy's name on an order means goods get shipped. That's the real asset. Not the building, not the stock, but the accumulated trust of everyone who has ever done business with him. So they place orders, enormous ones. Everything the suppliers will extend on that good name gets ordered, delivered, and immediately sold out the back door for a fraction of its value. Cash. Gone. And when the invoices come due, there's nothing to pay them with, because the money left the moment the merchandise did. They didn't rob him. They spent his reputation. Every small business owner watching that should feel something cold, because it's the most portable lesson in the series. What you actually own after decades is not equipment or premises. It's the fact that people say yes to you. and that asset can be liquidated by anyone who gets close enough to sign in your name. Now, the part that makes it unbearable, which is that the bill is not paid by the gambler. There's a car. It belongs to Davy's son, a kid who did nothing, who has been going to school and doing his homework and preparing for an audition, and whose car gets signed over to cover his father's losses. That car ends up being driven around by another teenager, in the same social circle, at the same school. So the debt becomes visible. It stops being a private financial matter between two men and becomes a thing his son's friends can see from the parking lot. And then the college. Money is gone too. The fund, the plan, the specific place he was going to go, all of it converted into chips that got pushed across a table in a room the boy has never seen. That's the truest thing about this whole subject. The person who gambles is almost never the person who pays the most. The gambler at least got something. The excitement, the belonging, the hours at the table. His son got a canceled future and a humiliation at school, and he was never asked. Which brings us to the argument the show stages and refuses to settle. At the end, ruined, Davy reaches for the only defense available to him. He says it's a sickness. He says he has a problem, an illness. Something that operates on him rather than something he does. And Tony's response is contempt. As far as Tony's concerned, Davy's an adult who was warned, who begged his way in, and who kept sitting down. The disease talk is an excuse, a way of laundering a series of choices into a diagnosis so nobody has to be responsible for them. Those are the two positions our entire culture holds about addiction, delivered in about 90 seconds, and the show does not tell you which one is right. But it does something better. It waits 6 years, and then it settles the question with a demonstration. Because eventually, Tony Soprano, the man who held Davy in open contempt, who thought this was a matter of character, develops the identical compulsion. He starts betting on football, then roulette. He loses staggering sums. He chases losses exactly the way Davy chased them. He becomes irrational, superstitious, angry at everyone around him, and completely unable to stop. And he is a man with more money, more power, and more control over his environment than Davy Scatino ever dreamed of. None of it helps. The strength wasn't the variable. And here's the detail that lands the knife. He never revisits his verdict on Davy. Not once. The self-knowledge doesn't arrive. He runs the exact program from the inside, and the correction never comes, because the position that gambling ruin is a failure of character is enormously comfortable to hold, right up until it's happening to you, and often after. Now the objection, which is real and which most people watching will feel. Didn't he do this to himself? He was refused. He begged. He was warned in plain language, and he kept going back. Whatever else is true, nobody put a gun to his head. Completely correct. He is culpable. I'm not interested in taking that away from him. But notice what culpability actually does in this story. It doesn't explain anything, and it doesn't prevent anything. It functions as an alibi. For the room, for the men running it, and for everyone who profits from the pattern. He chose. It is the permanent defense of every operation deliberately built around people whose choosing is impaired. The whole enterprise depends on human beings behaving in a way that is entirely predictable, thoroughly documented, and reliably profitable. And then the responsibility for the outcome is assigned exclusively to the one person in the transaction who wasn't thinking clearly. You can hold both. Davy did it. It was also done to him. Anyone who insists on only one of those is selling something, and I'd end with the thing that makes this a 2026 story rather than a period piece. Davy Scatino had to beg. That was the barrier. He had to humiliate himself repeatedly, in person, to a man who told him no, in order to get into a room that existed on specific nights at a specific address. Every single one of those obstacles was, accidentally, a protection. There were dozens of moments where the friction alone might have stopped him. There's no friction now. The game is in your pocket, 24 hours a day, and it knows your name. It sends you notifications. It offers you a welcome bonus. It has a bright, friendly interface designed by people who study exactly how long you'll stay. It will extend you credit before you've thought about whether you want it, and if you have a bad month, it will be warmer to you. Not colder, because that's what the data says works. Nobody's going to tell you no first. Everyone assumes they'd recognize predation because they assume it would look predatory. It doesn't. It looks like a chair being pulled out for you by someone smiling who says he's glad you came.